onions. That was one time Rodney got it like the rest of us. We slaved and toiled in the garden until our father was happy. Not long after that month of punishment, my dad and Helen got into a particularly nasty fight. The next day, Ronnie, always the stubborn, tough, marching to his own drum little brother that he was, grabbed our sister Julie and ran away to Aunt Doris's house in Lawrence, Kansas. I was too afraid of my dad to go with them. Soon after that, Rodney was arrested for violating parole and went to jail in Kansas and was then extradited to California to face the felony charge of parole violation. Eventually, he would be sentenced to a minimum security prison somewhere in Colorado, leaving only Donnie and me at home. My father called Ronnie and Julie at Aunt Doris's before we left for California again to see if they wanted to come with us. But they said no. So it was off to California so Helen could support and be close to Rodney as he awaited sentencing. We tore out of Kansas in an old gold Oldsmobile. For once we had left in a decent enough car. The tires had tread and they all matched. The interior was intact. There was no ripped up hanging headliner on the inside. The black vinyl roof on the outside was in pretty good shape, and there was no rust to speak of. But as usual, we left with nothing except our clothes and some blankets, once again leaving our home and dignity behind as our parents begged their way across the country. In Albuquerque, my dad and Helen went to the mission for help with gas and food. While we waited for help, my dad went to several pawn shops where he tried pawning Helen's diamond rings, but the pawn shops couldn't offer them enough money. So they went to gas stations and tried trading the rings for gas. No one would take the rings for love nor money or even gas, so it was back to the mission. We slept in the car overnight. The next day we couldn't wait for lunch to be served because we were hungry as hostages. We all sat in a waiting area outside the gym. Donnie had gone to look into the window of the gym where they served lunch. While looking in, he motioned me over to take a peek. We stood on tiptoes and peered through the smudged glass in the door, and our hungry eyes feasted on a table that held a huge roasted chicken and all the trimmings. Before we could get away from the window, a mean old lady who looked like a matron from a hardcore maximum security women's prison movie pushed the door open, almost knocking us down. She said, "If I catch you looking through that window again, you won't be eating anything but a Wish sandwich. That means you'll wish you had a sandwich." We sat the fuck down and licked our lips as her retreating fat ass created a vacuum that caused the double doors to whoosh close behind her. We told our parents about the delicious feast we were about to receive. When we were finally told we could enter, we rushed into the gym. My brother and I pulled up short when we saw the table. It held no finely roasted chicken and trimmings. Instead, like a horrible mirage, we saw cafeteria-style brown bowls, small ones at that, filled with pitiful, soupy, thin, watery pinto beans. A plate in the center of the table, where the roasted chicken had been, was piled high with small, bruised, gnarled little apples, and that was it. Now, mind you, we loved cooked beans, but at that moment it could not substitute for the delicious, mouth-watering taste of roasted chicken we'd prepared our mouths for. We sat down and ate what was offered. Later that day, the mission hooked my parents up with enough gas and food vouchers to make it all the way to Baldwin Park, where we moved into a rental house on Tracy Street, just down the street from Sierra Vista High School. Not long after moving to the house on Tracy Street, I was arrested and sent to jail for the first time. We, as in my homies and me, had been sitting in a car waiting for the driver to score some LSD when the wicked old black-gloved LAPD rousted us. We were searched, and I went to jail. A real jail, no juvie shit. A real fucking jail. The old downtown, scary, mainline chow fucking Los Angeles County jail. For possession of an illegal weapon, to wit, a switchblade knife. Collected from the various city jails, the big black and white LA County jail bus scooped me up and off to the big house I went. The intake and discharge process was a 24-hour process, and they processed prisoners 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The intake process was 24 hours in, 24 hours out. Going in, you lined up, stripped, bent over, and spread 'em, or smile for the sheriff, as they put it. Get hosed down with delousing solution, toweled off, and dressed out in the L.A. County blue denim work shirt and blue jeans and white plastic shower shoes. Then lined up for your prisoner ID wristband, and then worked your way through hallways and sally ports with the sliding heavy barred doors opening and banging shut behind you. The walls were painted an institutional puke yellow color. Wherever convict hands gripped bars, or where they scratched their names or most poetic, deep, sensitive thoughts, you could see the layers of previous colors of heavy oil-based paint. It looked like the last paint job was institutional puke green, and the one before was cloudy gray as my life. This was a madhouse of clanging and banging and hollering and buzzers and bells and yells of lockdown and count and screams and crying and praying and big brass keys jingling and locks turning and shouts of "Open 13!" and some of the scariest looking motherfuckers you could not even imagine in your wildest nightmares, standing in their cells hanging onto the bars, their faces pressed to the bars, staring at you as you walk by, like Jack Nicholson looking through the door in The Shining. Creepy, scary motherfuckers. And this madness goes on like that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The chow hall is like a big school cafeteria, but here you are open to being stabbed or murdered in a variety of methods, which makes going to chow a real adventure. Long tables are lined up with pewter pitchers on the tables filled with what we called swamp water because you could never really tell what it was you were drinking. It was dark and murky and it tastes like tea mixed with Kool-Aid, or maybe it was Kool-Aid mixed with fruit punch, but whatever it was at least cold, and the food, except for the mystery meat, wasn't too bad. After a few days in the cuckoo nest, all the convicts who had court were rounded up, and once again we were shackled, cuffed, and put on the big black and white L.A. County prisoner transport bus and bused to the city lockup where our charges were pending to attend court. That's right, 7 days in the hole. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I spent the week sleeping with my butt to the wall, hoping my lawyer would call. That line was stolen from a song called "Sleeping with My Butt to the Wall" by Hank Rotten Jr. and the Tennessee Lobster. Hope you boys won't mind. I remember the big lockup bullpen they put us in while they called prisoners one by one to see the judge. I don't remember where I got it, but I had found or had a penny in my pocket. I desperately wanted to let someone know what had happened to me. There was a payphone in the bullpen, and prisoners were making calls, collect and with change. Phone calls back then were 10 cents. I started rubbing the penny on the concrete floor till it was too hot, and then I'd let it cool, and then continue sanding it on the floor. Using another dude's dime as a model, I compared and scratched and rubbed and shaped it until it was the exact dimension of the dime. I then made a phone call with it. I shit you not, it worked. My parents did not have a phone, but my girlfriend's best friend, Diane, had one at her parents' house, and I knew the number by heart. I called Diane and told her how I ended up in jail and asked her to tell my parents where I was. I never even had to see the judge. He took one look at my charges and dismissed the case out of hand. Back on the bus to the L.A. County lockup, then the 24-hour processing out, and into the 2 o'clock in the morning mean streets of downtown L.A., I had to hitchhike home. I don't think anyone even missed me, but my heart was warmed with my father's concern when he grilled me about my absence and verbally humiliated me with a good ass-chewing. I can still feel the love. That would be my last year at home, as I was soon to embark upon my extraordinary journey. Author's Commentary. My memory ain't what it used to be, and I'm just saying that maybe, just maybe, the reason for my Watergate tape memory gaps could be due to A, having shot about 9 tons of cocaine and methamphetamine into my arms, or it could be due to B, the fact that I have dropped more than 100 hits of LSD and eaten several ounces of magic mushrooms in my life, or maybe it's C, because I've smoked hundreds of pounds of weed, a brick of hash, and a boulder of crack cocaine, or maybe it's D, all the above. At this time, please circle D as the correct answer. With that being said, I did my best to convey to my therapist how I had come to leave home in 1976. There were a whole lot of notes taken on this one and an almost constant nodding of the head, which was really distracting. But I persevered. I most certainly remember the day I left home in 1976 like it was yesterday. When we were in Kansas at the old farmhouse with the ultra-modern 2-seater shitter, we boys had discovered how to do homemade tattoos. Like dumbasses, we tattooed marijuana leaves and other shit on our shoulders and ankles. Then we spent a great deal of time hiding them from our father. After being MIA for 7 days in L.A. County lockup for the Switchblade, I had returned home to face the music. A few weeks later, and after months of us hiding our tattoos, one morning our dad confronted Donnie and me in the kitchen while we were eating breakfast. Nervously, we stood for inspection, trying to hide the tattoos on our hands. But like a bad magic trick, it was painfully obvious we were fooling no one. Much to our surprise, instead of him tearing us a new ass, he said, "If you boys are going to have tattoos, then by God, you'll have professional tattoos." What? Okay, I thought. Who are you, and what did you do with Hitler? My father never knew, or at least to my knowledge he never knew, that we called him Hitler behind his back. We couldn't believe he didn't kill us for tattooing each other, but looking back, this whole scene makes perfect, insane sense. We were back in Baldwin Park after Rodney's arrest in Kansas for a parole violation, and Rodney and his tattoos were now in prison. Ronnie and his tattoos had escaped to Aunt Doris's house, but Donnie and I were the lucky ones. That morning, my stepbrother and I loaded into our dad's van, and off to Hollywood we went. Downtown Hollywood, in a tattoo parlor, with Hitler, I mean our dad. Shit, I almost couldn't believe it. The experience was the real deal, and there they were, rough, tough, scary-looking old, long-haired biker dudes with skin that looked like tattooed beef jerky. One guy was working some fine skin art on a hot chick wearing a halter top and hot pants that were unbuttoned just enough for the artist to work on a small rose in bloody bloom near her hip. Boy, did I get an 18-year-old eyeball full. All of this on a hot day in crazy Hollywood with our dad actually paying for us to get real tattoos. It was unfucking believable. The walls were filled with tattoo art. There were lots of military images and slogans like Death Before Dishonor for the Marine Corps, Army and Navy stuff like mermaids and lots of hula girls in various stages of undress, and plenty of skulls, dragons, devils, and daggers, along with snakes and panthers and other anti-socially provocative messages and images. Amongst all the evil, wicked tattoos available, I saw a large variety of heart tattoos and declarations of love for God, mother, girlfriends, and country. I chose the red devil's head with the black top hat, blue bow tie, and blue eyes just like mine. The tattoo gun hummed and whirred as the artist dipped his needles into the colored inks. Like hungry little fire ants, they drank from the colored inks and returned to my flesh time and again, depositing the colors in a frenzy of stabbing, stinging bites. My stepbrother Donnie watched as I got my first real tattoo from the artist with the ginger-colored walrus goo-goo-ka-choo mustache. He had full sleeve tattoos that stretched and flexed over his bulging muscles. Rolled up in the sleeve of his white t-shirt was a pack of Camel non-filters. He chain-smoked as he worked on my left shoulder, his whirring little gun dipping in and out of his inks. I did my best to look tough, but really it hurt like hell. That's the price you pay to get into the club, a club I didn't even know I was joining at the time. Man, this was the coolest thing ever, I thought, as I admired my new tattoo. This was the first and last feeling of bonding I would ever experience with my father as a young man. Sad as it was, this was to be the only memory of bonding I would take with me onto the long road home, that and my inherited skinny white legs. Our crazy, dysfunctional family blended into the wackiness of Hollywood Boulevard as we headed back to Baldwin Park in the van. We rolled out of Hollywood and into the crush of rush hour traffic and slowly made our way home. I was on top of the world, but it wouldn't be for long. We were heading down the street to our house when my father turned his head to talk to me in the back seat. He said, "We need to talk." Well, damn. You know that nothing good ever starts with, "We need to talk." Right away, I was scared shitless. A flood of possibilities flew before my mind's eye, like my brothers and me roaming the streets at night, throwing rocks through people's big plate glass windows at 2 a.m, and then running and laughing scared shitless. Or stealing lemons and oranges from the neighbors' trees for which Ronnie and Julie had already been busted once. I will never forget the look on their faces as our dad made them eat every lemon they'd stolen. Or maybe it was for smoking dope or cutting class. Shit, the possibilities were endless. I exercised my right to remain silent. The next few words from my father's mouth left my ears ringing and my mind numb. This or something resembling it is what he said. For the past 11 years, as a result of your mother's death, you, Ronnie, and your sister Julie have each been receiving a death benefit check from Social Security. This came as a complete shock to me, because our mother's name was never spoken in our house. Hell, I'd never even seen a picture of her. It was like she never existed. My father handed back an envelope. As I opened it, he said in what sounded like slow motion, "I can't sign your check now that you are 18. I sat and stared at the check for $175 in my hand. I felt anger rising fast like the hairy-handed gent who ran amok in Kent. It came creeping with perfect hair and coal red-fired eyes. It was the hairy werewolf of anger. Angry for all the years and all the money that had been spent supporting my stepmother and her 2 sons. For all the years of cruelty I'd suffered at my father's mean words, and all the humiliation he'd heaped upon my heart, and for him standing by as my sister got the worst from the proverbial bad stepmother's love that was not love at all. I began to tremble. Tears welled up in my eyes, and in that instant the hairy werewolf of anger was upon me. The righteous waters of rage broke free and flooded my mind. When my father stopped at a stop sign, out the door I went. His shouts and threats crashed and fell onto the street behind my worn-out sneakers as I slapped a steady rhythm and beat, keeping time with the pounding of my heart as I ran down the street. I ran and ran, my tears spilling across my cheeks like hot liquid diamonds of pain. I ran to Jack's house and right into the comforting arms of drugs and alcohol. My life was to be sealed in this comfort, a very cruel comfort, as I would eventually discover. I would know it for the cruel comfort that it is. Drugs, alcohol, and sex are the seductive liars that slowly squeeze the life from you, and it does it all with a smile. The worst part is that you know the pain and suffering and self-loathing it brings to your life, but you go crawling back for more over and over again. For me, this destructive love affair would play out for more than 30 years. Many times I thought death was the only escape, but no matter how bad it got, I always knew I wanted to be somebody, so I never quit getting up, no matter how bad or how many times I fell. Jack. What can I say about Jack? I'd met Jack one night at a party, and over a period of time we'd become friends. Because he'd been kicked out of the Navy before he'd even seen a ship, Jack lived at his mother's house in the garage that had been converted into his pad. My ex-Marine father hated Jack, or Jack the Loser, as he called him. But Jack was 21, could buy beer, and had a car. And best of all, Jack had a great weed connection. Jack had long blonde hair and was quiet and sullen. He had the skin pallor of a death row inmate from San Quentin. Except for his thin blue eyes, Jack looked suspiciously close to being an albino. All things being equal, I didn't mind because we were both rejects, according to my father. Jack's pad was cool as hell, and I sought refuge in the dimly lit hippie paradise, which was full of black light posters, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, strawberry incense smoke, loud music, and the ever-present hypnotic stoner's crown jewel, the blood-red lava lamp that sat on the coffee table in front of a worn-out, low-slung sofa. Over a big fat joint of fine Panama red, I told Jack my story. Music soothes the savage beast. Jack carried the black vinyl disc, fingertips on edge, to the Marantz record player and impaled it onto the shiny silver rod that rose from the center of the felt-covered platform. The record hung suspended over the platform, and Jack applied power to the megawatt amp and system. Power surged, pulsed, and flooded the system like Frankenstein's first eye-popping moment when death became life with electricity and the words, "It's alive!" Black as death vinyl was lowered onto the platform. The player's arm sank smoothly, bared its diabolical diamond needle, sank it into the groove, and drank deeply from the blackness. The speakers stood silent like assassins behind black cloaks. The speakers revealed themselves after a reverent moment of silence, hissing with static curses as the needle bit deeper. I sat stoned on the couch in Jack's garage, holding the half-smoked joint in my left hand. Squinting through puffy red eyes, I watched the curling smoke twist and spiral. Anticipation of hearing Black Sabbath's War Pigs brought the vivid image of a raven, slouched, perched upon a human skull on top of a pike, cawing into the fog that crept and slithered in like sin, low and slow and close to the ground. In my stoned imagination, I could hear the clatter of armor and the storm of a battle brewing. Images of horses played, white-lathered and sweating under full armor, pawing and stamping, flaring their nostrils with adrenaline-charged hearts that beat like bass drums. The drummer tattooed his hi-hat with a single beat of metronomic rhythm. The record turned and the storm gathered slowly on the horizon, being pulled closer and closer with each revolution. On godless wings, the raven took flight, its wings beating the thick fog in time with the drummer's hi-hat. The raven delivered the beat to Ozzy's lips, and the battle cry of the righteous poured from his soul as Ozzy sang out, "Generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses." Razor-sharp guitar chords sliced through the air, and I could smell oily, scarred leather and see blowtorched, scorched blue and purple armor and chainmail covering battle-scarred, sweaty skin stretched over corded muscle and bones of both man and beast. Exploding from Jack's speakers, Black Sabbath tore from the east, slashing and tearing, riding hard, war drums pounding, guitars blazing, onto the battlefield of good and evil, and into Jack's garage in a slurry of mayhem, impaling our brains onto spear tip of sound. The battle raged for 7 minutes and 58 seconds. My imagination rose and fell on waves of burning bodies and flew over war pigs crawling. Black Sabbath crushed the war pigs and flew back into the black-light sky of Jack's garage. The one-eyed raven cawed, flapped its wings, and returned to its midnight perch. Jack and I sat stoned to the bone as the song ended, with the record turning, sizzling, and popping. The 150-decibel klaxon of the Harvest Gold wall phone with the 150-mile corkscrew cord began to ring. The rude interruption grabbed us by our feet and pulled us back to earth and back into Jack's garage. Jack disappeared to answer the phone. I pulled another strawberry zigzag from the pack and pinched some sticky bud into it, and smoothly rolled another joint, saying, "Wow, that was some heavy shit." Jack's long blonde hair covered his face as he said, in a voice as dry as thick as peanut butter on a saltine, "Hey, that was my mom. I gotta pick her up from work." His hair rose and fell with each breathing word, causing me to almost spill the weed onto the floor as stone laughter rolled up from my stomach and out my mouth like circus clowns getting out of one of those little cars. And like the clowns, the laughs just keep coming. Jack scowled and went to find his car keys. I spent the next hour thinking about boxes of Captain Crunch, Lucky Charms, Milky Way bars, cheeseburgers, no make that triple cheeseburgers, fries, ketchup sandwiches, pickles, Oreo cookies, and the best munchies in the world, ice cream, tubs, buckets, bars, fudge swirls, strawberry shortcake, frozen bananas, and bomb pops, vivid, cold, and sweet, red, white, and blue. Paranoia. Someone pulled up outside. The cops, I thought. I gotta hide the weed. My mouth went dry as a jackrabbit's ass in July in the Mojave Desert. My thoughts raced as fast as they could through the La Brea tar pits of my stoned mind. I looked around the room full of blacklight posters, lava lamps, ill-colored vinyl, mismatched chairs, tapestries, and bongs, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and nowhere to stash the weed. Then I heard doors slamming. My imagination played a grainy image of commandos rushing in, yelling, guns drawn, and me going to prison. Jack opened the door to the garage, and I stood there like a deer in the headlights, a deer holding a half ounce of Primo stash, with prison gang rape scenes playing across my glazed eyes like a cheap porn movie. It was Jack's turn to send in the clowns. Very funny indeed. Relief washed over my stone brain and flowed down to my skinny white legs, all the way down to my cheap sneakers hanging like clappers beneath my frayed blue jean bell-bottoms. I actually fell, into the crippled couch and resumed my cleaning and rolling of the sacred weed. Jack's nose peeked through the curtain of his hair as he dug through the Valencia orange crate in search of the next album. The mood in the room had shifted. Jack examined the next sacrifice to the gods and then placed it on the altar. I tossed Jack a fat joint. He turned on the mirror ball. Tiny lights danced around the room, a surreal mix of black light, red lava light, and smoke that called softly for Pink Floyd to be dropped onto the table. With a hush of velvet against vinyl, the arm and needle went to work. The needle, now calm, dipped and sipped from the first silky thread. Gold smoke swirled around us, and we melted into the dark side of the moon. Pizza. Yes, pizza. That's what we need, I thought to myself. Pink Floyd spiraled and twisted into infinity in the cumulus cloud of gold smoke drifting above us. Jack hit the lights, breaking the trance. Damn, I muttered, blinking, watching him through the hazy fog as he went to the cooler for another cold Michelob. I'd bought 2 cases of it with the first and last check for my mom's Social Security money, along with 2 ounces of Acapulco Gold weed. Man, we were fucked up, looking at a red, swollen Chinese puffed rice eyes. I brought out the last of my cash stash, enough for a pizza. Jack made the call for an extra large, extra everything, we are so stoned pizza for delivery. In the weed time warp, it seemed like it took a week and a half, but it was only a very long half hour before it arrived. Pizza sauce clown lips smacking, hot cheese slapping chins, and grinning like mental patients, we devoured it. The next morning found me waking hungover with a nickel left in my pocket, on a crippled couch, surrounded by a cold pizza box, overflowing ashtrays, half-empty beers, and nowhere to go. When Jack came back from the shower, he asked me what I was going to do. Without thinking, I just blurted out, "Fuck it, man, I'm splitting. I'm going to Kansas. I have relatives there." Jack left the garage and came back with an old green backpack with a Boy Scout logo on it and said, "Follow me." We went to the kitchen and he filled the backpack with a variety of canned goods from his mother's cabinets, then grabbed an old sleeping bag, and he said he'd give me a ride to the freeway when I was ready. I told Jack, that's cool, but I'd rather walk. I shouldered the pack and carried the sleeping bag rolled tight with rope and headed out the door. I walked to the freeway on-ramp about a mile from Jack's house. It was a typical California morning. I can only describe it like this. It's the taste you'd get if you licked a salty, galvanized chain-link fence, and the feeling of walking barefoot in wet grass through the morning ground fog, the look of tall palm trees seeking sunlight, a cool breeze blowing through the lemon and orange trees, the screeching of a seagull, all tied together with a searing hot guitar lick from Jimi Hendrix. That, my friends, is what I call a California morning. If you could eat that tasty burrito of sight, sound, and touch, you would know what it felt like that morning to me. I made it to the ramp of I-10 East and stuck my thumb out to every car, truck, big rig, or serial killer van that rolled up the ramp to freedom, all the while thinking of some way to go back home with apologies or lies to cover the last 3 days of being AWOL from home and school. But before I could chicken out and go running home, a car stopped for me. I slung the 50 pounds of canned goods onto my shoulder, grabbed the sleeping bag, and ran up the ramp to my destiny. Chapter 7. The Buffalo Nickel and Bell-Bottom Blues. My first ride out of Baldwin Park got me to Indio, California. I thanked the driver, grabbed my gear, and, dodging cars, I zigzagged my skinny white ass to the connecting ramp that lay on the other side of the 4 lanes of traffic. Somehow I made it to the other side without being run over. I stepped over the curb and set my gear down in the dirt. I stood in my paisley print hippie shirt and looked down at the baby blue bell-bottom jeans that almost completely covered my sneakers. I looked up, brushed the hair from my blue eyes, and stared at the back of the merge sign, where someone had written in large black letters, "No pills, no thrills, no dope, no hope." I grabbed the big black marker from my bag and added, "No shit." By now I was really hangover hungry. I looked toward home one last time and for a second wished I could turn back. But like my dad used to say, once you leave like that, you can never go back. I sighed and opened my bag. I dug into the canned goods and found a can of tuna and thought, cool. Well, it would have been cool if I'd had a can opener. Now looking back, I should have seen this as a sign and gone home right then. But I was as stubborn and defiant as the fresh, sinning, grinning, blue-eyed devil tattooed on my shoulder. They, whoever they are, say the devil's in the details. And when it came to not having a can opener that day, I had to say they were truly right. I put the can back in my pack and with my stomach growling, stuck out my hungry thumb and waited for a ride. The vapors and noise of the traffic rushing over me increased my nausea. I was fishing for a ride, not even bothering to look over my shoulder to see if anyone was stopping, when I heard a horn honk. I turned around to see a small pickup stopped a little way up the ramp. I gathered my gear and hustled up the ramp to my destiny on the highway to hell. I have to be honest here, I don't remember the name of the guy who picked me up, but I sure remember his truck. It was a little Toyota painted canary yellow with a black shell on the back. It had badass tires and chrome rims with hot custom flames painted on the hood and fenders. Those were all the rage in Southern California at the time. I knew a few dudes who owned similar trucks, but this one was my fantasy truck. The driver met me at the back and opened the rear half-glass door. I tossed my gear over the tailgate into a carpeted interior. I could see it was completely tricked out inside, with the entire bed, floors, walls, and ceiling covered in gold shag carpet. There was even a wine glass rack on the ceiling and a small bed. In a million years, I would never even dream of being able to own such a fine machine. I walked around and hopped into the passenger seat, and away we went with the windows down, the rock and roll blasting, and the wind blowing through our hair. In Phoenix, we caught Interstate 17 north, heading to Flagstaff, where we would pick up Interstate 40 eastbound. A few hours later, we stopped at a rest area on I-40 for a break. While we were resting there, the dude asked me if I had a driver license. I said yes. Well, it was true. I had a valid Kansas driver license. I'll be happy to drive, I assured him. I slipped into the driver's seat after he gave me some instructions, which went something like, stay on I-40, wake me up when we get to Amarillo. But I think all I heard him say was blah, 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 something, something, something. Then the dude crawled into the back to get some sleep. As a child, I'd traveled all my life with my parents. My brothers and I were stealing their car and driving it around every chance we got, but driving cross-country was another matter altogether. I pulled out of the rest area, confident and cool, and headed down Interstate 40 as pretty as you please, grinning like a mental patient. The sun left behind a marigold-smeared crimson sky in my rearview mirror that soon fell to darkness as a starry New Mexico night welcomed the headlights of the cool little truck. I sat behind the green glow of the stereo system and dash lights, listening to a local rock station, smoking one of the dude's cigarettes, feeling cool as hell and all grown up. I was young and inexperienced, sure, but it didn't take long for me to realize that somewhere in Tucumcari, New Mexico, I'd rolled onto the wrong highway and was now almost to Dalhart, Texas. I guess I'd missed the signs that said Texas Highway 54 and North and Dalhart, Texas, so many miles, which would have sounded the alarm that I was no longer on I-40. I pulled over and unfolded the Chinese puzzle Texaco map. Opening it was easy. Folding it back to its original position was, well, a bit of an ancient Chinese secret. But I saw that I could catch Highway 287 in Dalhart and then head south to Amarillo. It was way too late to turn around, so off to Dalhart we went. Anxiety and fear flooded my system, and I thought I was going to puke. Thanks to my father, I was always terrified of making mistakes. I made it to Dalhart and hauled ass south toward Amarillo on 287, hoping and praying that driving at 70 miles an hour would get us there before the dude woke up. We did make it to Amarillo, but we would be late, and when we got there, we would not be in the cool little canary yellow truck. We would arrive in separate white ambulances with sirens wailing and red lights flashing. The morning was coming, and as dawn began to yawn and the headlights lost their purpose, I realized I was almost to Amarillo. The dude was still asleep, and I thought it would be a good time to slip in a cassette tape. It was not. I looked up from the cassette tape I was about to insert into the tape deck, only to see that we were flying off the road into the mean green median at about 70 miles an hour. The truck plunged down the grassy bank. In that instant, I looked into the rearview mirror, right into the horrified eyes of the dude in the back who had just sat up. We locked eyes for a split second, and then, and this is no shit, what happened next was just like something from the fucking movies. I cranked the wheel hard right to bring the truck back up to the road. Way too hard, as it turned out. I felt the truck turning over onto the driver's side. It started its first death roll, and in that instant I saw everything that was about to happen to me. As the truck rolled, crashed, and bounced, it flew, spinning over in midair, and at some point it actually achieved zero gravity for just a moment. In that split second I saw, in slow-motion tunnel vision, everything that was loose in the truck floating around me. Then, just like in the movies, my life flashed before my eyes, ending with the scene where I jumped out of my father's van back in Baldwin Park and had taken off running. The truck crashed back to earth in a cacophony of sight and sound. The churning black earth and green grass rained down like confetti to the sound of breaking glass and crunching metal, with a backbeat of crashing thunder, interrupted only by a nanosecond of pure golden silence while the truck rolled over again in midair. Then it crashed down and rolled again. Like a runner sliding into home plate, it slid through the median, digging a deep furrow before it caught and flipped one more time, ending with a flourish and a final solid half-twist onto its back. I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying on my stomach, sandwiched between the roof and the seats, with my skinny legs, in their baby blue bell-bottom jeans, sticking through where the little glass sliding window used to be, and I could hear a tire squeaking as it spun to a stop. I could smell gasoline and burnt rubber and fresh earth. At the end of my outstretched fingers, amongst the glass and paperwork and other personal items, I saw a $5 bill. I wrapped my hand around it and passed out again. When I came to, I could hear voices. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled from under the truck. Semi-trucks lined the highway, and truckers were helping me out of the wreckage. I still held the $5 bill in a death grip. I looked past the dude being loaded onto a stretcher and could see a long trail of his worldly possessions strewn throughout the median and scattered across the highway. That was the last I saw of him before I was transported to Amarillo General Hospital. Sometime later, I stood in front of the emergency room with my newly bandaged shoulder and my assorted minor cuts, scrapes, and bruises, and I thought, what the fuck am I going to do now? All I had was my Buffalo nickel and the new, only slightly damaged $5 bill, my hospital discharge papers, and a first aid parting gift, which was a sack containing new bandages and tape. Then the answer to my question walked up in a Stetson hat, wearing cowboy boots, and looking every bit of what you'd expect a Texan to look like. This was a time when you could still read stories in the newspapers about hippies being separated from their long hair in Texas via some sheep shears. The old boy stopped and took a long look at me and warned me that it might not be safe for me and my long hair and baby blue bell-bottom jeans to be walking the streets. I don't know where the guy came from, but he must have been sent by God, because he showed up like an angel and saved my narrow-eyed ass. I told the cowboy my story and showed him the slip of paper with the address for the garage where the wrecked truck had been taken, and he offered to take me there so I could retrieve my gear. I accepted his kind offer, grateful to him for keeping me safe from the hippie shearing crazed rednecks I thought might be lurking around every corner, just waiting to snatch me up and shave my head to make a sample of me. I climbed into the safety of his big Texas-sized pickup truck, and away we went. One might at this point also be asking how I escaped such a horrific crash with only minor scrapes and bruises. Honestly, my only explanation is, by the grace of God. And that's what I told the cowboy when he asked me the same question on the way to the salvage yard. We pulled into the yard, got out, and walked into the cool, shady interior of the garage. I looked at what used to be the cool little truck, and I now understood why everyone at the hospital couldn't believe I had survived. The truck was totaled, crumpled, smashed, and bent in unnatural ways. The roof was smashed clear down to the dash. At the time of the crash, I had not been wearing a seatbelt, and if I had been wearing the seatbelt, I'm sure I would have been severely injured or killed. Looking at the truck, I was more surprised than anyone else that I'd survived. I grabbed my gear from what used to be the cool little truck and loaded it into the back of the cowboy's pickup. Hospitality in Texas knows no limits, and I was ever grateful when the old boy took me to a laundromat. He introduced me to the lady who ran it and gave her instructions to watch over me. With that done, he said, "Good luck, young man," and strolled out of the laundromat into the midday sun, casting a long Texas-sized shadow down the hot sidewalk. "The wash is on me," the lady drawled. She took my bag of clothes and proceeded to wash, dry, and fold my jeans, shirts, socks, and yes, even my underwear, much to my embarrassment. I left the sanctuary of the laundromat in the goodness of the woman with her words dripping around my ears like warm honey as she called, "Y'all be careful now, you hear?" I limped into the hot Amarillo sun, casting only a small shadow onto the sidewalk, alone now except for some clean clothes, a bag of dented canned goods, a $5 bill, a sleeping bag, and my buffalo nickel. I started walking to the highway with my right hand fingering the crumpled $5 bill and the buffalo nickel in the bottom of my pocket. Texas hospitality and my luck held when a guy stopped and picked me up in an old cream-colored Ford Galaxy 500. After some small talk, the driver must have decided I was cool because he pulled a big fat joint out of his cigarette pack and sparked it up. After we smoked the joint, he stopped to grab a 6-pack of cold Rocky Mountain Coors beer. Off we went, drinking and driving down the highway with my future shimmering in the heat waves of the hot black Texas asphalt ahead of me. The ride ended at exit 80 on I-40, just a bit east of Amarillo. I gathered my gear, and the driver took a left at the end of the ramp, disappeared over the asphalt horizon and into the heat waves of the Texas plains. The beer and the joint helped ease my pain as I dragged my gear to the side of the ramp. Shit, I was buzzed big time from the beer, and the joint had pushed me over the cliff of hunger and right into Munchies land. I looked around. Fuck, I muttered. I'm in the middle of fucking nowhere. Then, across the road, I saw some big white letters painted on the roof of an A-frame building. Shit, it was a KOA, otherwise known as Campers of America. Wrecked and battered and in enemy territory, I staggered and limped across the highway, leaving my gear where it lay, and homed in on the oasis of KOA. The lady behind the counter eyed me suspiciously as I searched for something to eat that was within my budget. Suddenly I spied the holy grail of my drunken and stoned desire, a can of Beanie Weenies, which had a handy new pull top. It was mine, along with a pack of Bugler rolling tobacco. I weaved my way back across the highway to find my gear. I chowed down on those killer Beanie Weenies. In the late Texas afternoon, I wiped my mouth, took a long drink of warm water from my canteen, and then proceeded to roll a smoke. And a great smoke it was, laid right on top of a full stomach of Beanie Weenies. The only thing I needed then was a nap. I shook out my sleeping bag, lay down, and stretched out to finish smoking and contemplate my situation. But before I knew it, I'd passed out cold. Author's Commentary. Eventually, days blend into weeks, weeks blur into months, and then the year eventually forms a single perpetual day, like Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day. Today, I stopped for my 10-hour break in Amarillo, Texas, at the Pilot truck stop. I ate, got washed up, returned to my truck, and changed into my favorite dark blue pinstriped PJs and a clean white T-shirt that still had the faint, clean smell of Clorox. I reclined onto my bunk and rested my head on a pillow of dreams. I drifted and floated in twilight memories of Rodney and the smoking bang-bang comedy of the beep-beep Roadrunner truck, and thought about that day when I'd left home all those years ago. Eventually I faded and fell over the edge into a deep, dark dream. In the dream, my big black Peterbilt rolled through the night, running like 500 horses at full gallop. Chrome stacks smoked and sweated in desert moonlight. Chicken lights burned and blazed amber and fire red. I had the hammer down and was rolling eastbound. The blue moonlight scratched the back of the black snake as I sat in my custom air ride seat behind those 500 horses. As captain and commander, I urged the beast on through the starry night, rocking and rolling down the highway, strolling through the desert with the band America keeping the beat with an old song called A Horse with No Name. I never really understood the lyrics to the song, but in this dream, the song suddenly made perfect sense to me. I never felt as alone as I did when I heard the band sing the lyrics, and in the desert you can remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. I merged with the lyrics and crashed into a dreaming understanding as I was sucked into a hole of oneness with the stars, the cars, and the jackrabbits that were hijacked by my headlights. The desert with its many beating hearts all poured together, and I was instantly one with the universe. I listened to the next line as the band sang, "It felt good to be out of the rain." That was the last thing I remember hearing as the dream dimmed and began to fade. I held on to its comforting thread as long as I could, but gravity began to bring me home from the celestial highway, as the 500 horses and my universal ass rolled on out and into the fast lane. From the dream, I did a free fall through time and space and fell back into my body. I hit it hard. The crash shocked me, causing my consciousness to stir. I was aware of a buzzing and ringing in my ears as I raced toward the surface. Lights flashed like tiny quasars as my eyelids scraped over my eyeballs like slow-moving garage doors, and all I could do was lay there as my brain did a post-trip inspection of my condition and surroundings. I stared, unblinking, at the ceiling of my rig, and all I could think was, damn it, I hate it when that happens. I lay, staring at the ceiling, lingering in the vapor of the dream, and let my memory drift back to 1976. On the side of the road, near the ramp to exit 80 on Interstate 40, a boy was lying on an old green sleeping bag under a crystal ball clear blue Amarillo sky, with his head resting on a worn and frayed old green canvas Boy Scout backpack full of dented canned goods. I could feel the warm sun on his face. In my mind's eye, I watched him as he awoke with a start. I grinned at the memory, seeing him. As he jumped up from his sleeping bag, slapping at his skinny leg, I laughed out loud. He'd drunk beer and smoked a joint before being dropped off on the side of the road. Then he'd eaten a can of Beanie Weenies, rolled a cigarette, and had passed out before he'd finished smoking it. The hand-rolled cigarette had dropped from his fingers, and the cherry burrowed like a fiery little mole into the cheap sleeping bag. The gentle breeze had nurtured and caressed the ember into a smoldering, ever-widening hole that crept up to his jeans like an amorous thief bent on stealing a kiss in the middle of the night. The smoldering hole pressed against his baby blue bell-bottom jeans. The jeans yielded, and one smoldering hole became two. The two smoldering holes embraced until his skinny leg felt the heat. His nerve sentries had been caught napping, but now they awoke and scrambled, sounding the alarm with mad shouts of pain to his brain. The boy woke with a start, as alert as a fireman to the klaxon of an alarm. I folded my comforter back and swung my still skinny white legs over the side of my bunk. I stood and stretched. My tattoos groaned. "Getting old like a motherfucker," I said aloud as I reached for the first smoke of the day. I dressed, then parted and tied back the black curtains that separate the bunk from the cab of my Peterbilt. I turned on the kicking stereo system and queued up my morning anthem, Prodigal Son by the Rolling Stones. Mick and the boys came over the speakers like a dose of heroin, slow and funky and blue with rhythm. I moved and grooved as I brewed my coffee, made my bed, and slowly started my day 35 years later, and only 5 miles away from where that long-forgotten poor boy, that prodigal son, had lain. I set my mug of steaming coffee on the floor near my seat where I would not spill it, and slid behind the wheel. I adjusted my seat and strapped in, then entered the start code and turned the key. The beast came to life as the diesel fuel raced through the system. I checked my gauges, picked up my mug, and took a sip of the morning's nectar. I looked into the mirror and down the length of the 53-foot trailer, engaged the clutch, covered the brake, and eased the Eaton Fuller shifter into first gear. I reached over and pushed the red and yellow air supply controls in and eased out of the hole. Like ants leaving the anthill, truck after truck left the truck stop in long lines, doing pretty much the same thing ants do every day. I swung the Peterbilt wide and snaked my way through the urine-soaked, rutted, potholed parking lot and up to the exit of the pilot truck stop. I turned left and eased up to the entrance of Interstate 40. The blinker beat a steady rhythm as I made my turn. Shifting, checking mirrors, watching my RPMs, I geared up the distance of the ramp and merged into the chaos of the morning traffic rolling eastbound. After easing the gear shift into the big hole, I set the cruise at 65 and began to relax and settle in for the long day's ride. I took another sip of sweet coffee and lit another Marlboro. The breakfast of champion truckers. As I rolled down Interstate 40, I reached back into my mind and slipped the memory book off the shelf again. I turned to the page where, a very long time ago, I really was that young man, the one who, after jumping up and putting out the fire, sat atop his gear in the morning sun, his arm high, his thumb out, seeking a ride. To my astonishment, I now saw a backpack with a pair of young man's legs beneath it, walking up the ramp at exit 80. Some things never change, I thought, as I rolled past another man's son walking up that very same ramp. I flashed back to thoughts of my father and how I'd left home all those years ago. The cowboy dropped a quarter and Harry Chapin's Cats in the Cradle began to play. I swallowed hard and fought back tears, but they would not be denied. They lived and died on my cheek one at a time. In the rearview mirror of my memory, I watched the ghost of Lonesome Red and his big red Peterbilt slow and stop for the boy on the highway. Even though I now knew the boy was going to be okay, I knew he'd live a lifetime of hard lessons and really hard living before he would become the man he was going to become. I looked back one more time at my own ghost climbing up into that big red rig, and as I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, all I could think was, what a dumbass. As a father now myself, I could not imagine my own son being the young man walking up that ramp heading down that long, hard road, which some 35 years later had brought me right back to that very spot once again. Chapter 8. Lonesome Red. I awoke with a start, and it only took a second before I heard my brain shouting, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" I jumped up and started slapping at my skinny leg where a hole about the size of a 50-cent piece on the right side of my leg, right in between the front and back pocket of my baby blue bell-bottom jeans, was smoldering. I grabbed my military surplus canteen full of sun-heated water, doused my leg, kicking the paint up a notch as the hot water hit my burning skin. I danced around doing a little hurts like hell jig. Then I saw smoke pouring from a hole in my sleeping bag. I emptied the rest of the contents of my canteen onto the fiery cavity. I stood in the sun, shirtless, in my baby blue bell-bottom jeans, hungover, beat up, and now burnt. My head was an attic full of cobwebs from the beer and weed and the painkillers I'd received from the emergency room at Amarillo General Hospital. I took some deep breaths to clear my head. Then I rebandaged my shoulder from the first aid supplies I'd been given before I was discharged from hospital, put my shirt on, and sat down on top of my pack, which was still full of heavy-assed canned goods. My eyes scanned the westbound highway to the horizon, but it was about as empty as my pockets. As my sleeping bag dried, I rolled more smokes from my bag of bugler tobacco. I tried to focus on sticking my thumb out to each car that sped by, but from my perspective, I was so far down the hill from the interstate I couldn't tell if anyone could even see me. Anyway, I was preoccupied. I was going over and over the wreck that only a few hours ago had almost killed me. No one stopped for me, and I ended up spending the night there on the side of the road. I awoke to a cold morning's dawn as black and blue as my bruises. I lay burrowed in my sleeping bag until the sun slowly rose above the horizon, warming me inch by inch with its warm golden glow. Unzipping the bag from within, I crawled from my flannel cocoon and slowly emerged, as cold and damp as a new butterfly. Unfolding my wings, I faced the sun and basked in the light. I was battered and bruised, to be sure, but the power of youth protected me like a knight's armor. I felt invincible and free. This power, this feeling of survival, was intoxicating, and I was ready to take on the world. I rolled up my bag and lit a smoke. I sat there smoking, feeling like a warrior. I watched people drive by like they didn't even see the battered knight or his hungry thumb seeking a ride. I smoked and thought about my father. My feelings were a mixture of anger, hatred, confusion, and sadness. I smoked and reflected on why I'd left home in the first place. The sound of a straining diesel motor brought me back from the memory. Shielding my eyes, I looked to the west. I saw the stacks blowing black smoke. I instinctively raised my arm as high as I could and stuck my thumb out. It followed the semi across the overpass, and I prayed it would stop. Heading down the other side of the overpass, the pipes said, "Whap, pop, 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 whap, pop, pop, pop." And just like that, I thought there was no chance it would stop. So I pulled my arm in and looked back to the west. Then a loud air horn sounded, scaring the shit out of me. I turned to see the big smoking beast sitting up the road a ways with the passenger door hanging open. Grabbing my gear, I hustled up the ramp, making my escape from exit 80. I approached the open mouth of the beast idling there and heard a voice boom out, "So where you going, boy?" Cautiously, I climbed up and peered inside the cab and replied, "East, to Lawrence, Kansas." "Well, come on," he said. "I can take you to St. Louis, and you can get a ride back to Lawrence from there." The rig was a red oxidized color with big chrome stacks. I pushed my gear up and climbed in. He was a large, older man with red hair, and he looked just like you'd expect a trucker to look like back then. He wore cowboy boots and a big silver belt buckle that was as big as a dinner plate, and his cowboy hat sat on the dash. After I'd settled in, the driver started going through the gears, the truck shuddering and lurching as he nosed it out onto the big road. "They call me Lonesome Red," he said over the sound of the big motor, adding that he was hauling a load of oranges out of California. And that was about all he said. Lonesome Red was a man of few words. Later that night, we pulled into a truck stop. A real truck stop, not like the truck stop/travel plazas of today. It was a real honest-to-goodness, just like in the movies truck stop. I could smell hamburgers and onions grilling even before my feet hit the first step. My stomach was acknowledging the smell with a ferocious growl that propelled me through the door. Upon entering, the first thing I saw was a big sign that said, "Drivers only this section," and it went on to say that they valued all customers, but truck drivers would be seated and served first. I felt a real sense of importance and pride as we were seated and served ahead of the regular folks. We were seated at one of the red and white checkered cloth-covered tables, and I could hear the clattering of pots and pans from the kitchen and a bell ringing and the cook barking, "Order up!" We were barely seated when the cigarette dangling from her lips waitress appeared through the dense fog of cigarette smoke to take our orders. The old gal looked to be about 6'5", but I saw about 12 inches of her height was red hair combed and teased into a perfect beehive hairdo, and according to her black and white tag, her name was Beverly. Beverly pulled her order book and pen from her white apron, and Lonesome Red ordered for the both of us, and I did not, nor could I, object to a free juicy cheeseburger and fries with a cold Coca-Cola being ordered for me, as the beanie weenies were now just a vague memory. The joint was buzzing with sights and sounds and seemed chaotic, but the amazing waitress never missed a beat as she placed our fare before us. Then, with one eye closed to the curling smoke from her cigarette, she managed to ask in a voice that sounded like she was channeling Al Jolson, "Anything else, Red?" I watched the impossibly long ash of her cigarette, waiting for it to fall, but it defied gravity. It was amazing. Lonesome Red declined the anything else, and we ate in silence. Lonesome Red was a man of few words. While Red paid the check, the amazing waitress filled his Stanley full of very black coffee. We stepped out of the diner and into the night. Lonesome Red fired up the beast, geared it up, and we rolled out of the lot. The night was blacker than the coffee that Beverly had poured into his Stanley thermos. The beast's headlights cut through the darkness like a Ginsu knife, quick and clean and to the bone of the road. Lonesome Red didn't seem to tire as we rolled on through the night and into the dawn, with him chasing his black coffee with one Marlboro after another. True to his word, I climbed out of his rig in St. Louis, and with a wave of his hand, Lonesome Red was gone. Lonesome Red was a man of few words right to the end. I packed my gear down to a grassy area in the cloverleaf of the interchange of I-70 and rolled out my sleeping bag. I'd been up 2 full days keeping Lonesome Red company, and was completely exhausted. After sleeping like the dead all night, I was awakened mid-morning to the steady beat and rhythm of a billy club drumming against my foot. I opened my morning-crusted eyes and was greeted by an officer of the law. Lazily, I rolled a cigarette as the officer examined my driver's license. I smoked patiently while the officer explained that a county worker had called him about a body lying in the grass. The county worker had been mowing the clover leaf, and after having almost run over me with his mower, he'd tried unsuccessfully to wake me up and thought I might be dead. After warning me about how dangerous it could be to sleep on the side of the road, the cop said, "I'm just doing my job," then added, You better be moving along if you know what's good for you." I uttered a few yes sirs, then packed up my gear and started walking to the freeway ramp to I-70. I could see the magnificent, shimmering silver St. Louis Arch beckoning me to enter as I made my way to Interstate 70. I joined the long line of tourists and entered into the base of the arch. I set my gear down and rested on a bench, but before my ass could warm the seat, I saw the security guard homing in on me like a laser pointer. I grabbed my gear and made ready to